gone, because now your partner will be fantasizing about you, and they'll find ways to reignite that intense sexual and emotional chemistry that's been long forgotten. And it doesn't even matter if your partner said they wanted to get a divorce, because now the lifelong bond that you share will be so strong that they'll never think about leaving you again. Now I have to warn you, the longer you wait, the more likely it is that you'll continue making the same 3 marriage-murdering mistakes that are pushing you and your spouse further and further apart. So watch this video until the end, and you'll not only learn how to fix these mistakes, but you'll be able to stop the toxic arguments once and for all. And you'll bring back the kind of love that you felt for one another when you stood at the altar and promised to spend a lifetime together. Now, I know this may sound too good to be true from where you're standing, especially if you've already tried everything. And to some extent, you're right, it's not going to be easy. A marriage isn't something that can be rebuilt overnight. But if you continue watching this video to the end, I'll give you the tools you need to stop the bleeding and begin to rebuild the bond with your spouse. After that, it's only a matter of commitment, patience, and hard work. And if you really truly love your partner, if you really want to build a marriage that will last a lifetime, then you won't even think twice about putting in the effort. If you're still skeptical and you're worried that your marriage is beyond saving, let me tell you briefly about Emily and Andrew, a married couple that I worked with a few months ago. This couple would engage in violent screaming arguments every single waking moment, even in front of their 7-year-old daughter, who couldn't help but to beg and plead for her parents to stop. In fact, Emily and Andrew's arguments were so intense that their living room looked like it had been hit by Hurricane Katrina. And when Emily thought things couldn't get any worse, Andrew told her the most earth-shattering words she'd ever heard. "It's over," he said. "I just don't love you anymore. I want a divorce." Emily felt like her heart was being ripped right out of her body. She had tried everything in her power to stop the impending divorce. She begged, pleaded, and even bribed Andrew to stay with her. But of course, this only made matters worse, and Andrew was ready to move out of the home they had spent 6 years building together. Emily was terrified because she was about to lose her husband, her family, and her entire life. It was at this point that Emily came to me for help, and that's when everything started to change. Suddenly, there was no more bickering, no more sleeping in separate rooms, and no more vicious attacks. Over time, Andrew began feeling this weird, uncomfortable loneliness when Emily wasn't around. He began calling and texting her relentlessly. And finally, after 1 month of using my marriage-saving advice, Andrew begged her for forgiveness, apologized for ever questioning his marriage vows, and said the words she thought she'd never hear again. "I love you forever and always." Now, I could go on for an eternity with stories like this, but at this point, I'm sure you're wondering, what did Emily start doing differently? How did her marriage go from being on the brink of divorce to what it is now? And how can I do the same for my marriage? Well, the first thing I did was to tell Emily about the 3 marriage-murdering mistakes that were preventing her from having the relationship she'd always dreamed of. So listen carefully, because you're about to hear information that most married couples will never know about. Marriage-murdering mistake number 1, believing that you can talk your way out of a marriage crisis. Like most people, you probably think that in order for your marriage to thrive and flourish, you need to communicate better with your partner. While communication is obviously important, a lack of communication is not what's responsible for killing your marriage. The thing is, you've been trying to communicate a dozen different ways with your spouse since the first problems arose. But have they worked? Has anything you've said worked? What you need to do is completely transform how you interact with your spouse by using what I call my immediate impact actions. And I'll explain exactly how that works in just a minute. The second marriage-murdering mistake will probably shock you. Right now, you probably think you need your partner's help to save the marriage. You assume that unless your partner's also willing to put in the effort, it's game over. Dead wrong again. The reality is that you don't need your partner to be involved in the process of rebuilding the marriage. In many ways, it's actually better if you take the first steps on your own. This gives you time to rewire your spouse's perception of you and rebuild attraction on a subconscious level before they become aware of what's happening. You don't have to beg and you don't have to plead, even if your spouse has already mentally checked out of the marriage. Which brings me to marriage-murdering mistake number 3, continually reminding your spouse of all the problems that are plaguing your marriage. When you start a conversation with your partner in an effort to solve your differences, you're really just further reinforcing their belief that the marriage is severely damaged. Over time, as this happens more and more often, these negative interactions will force your spouse to feel bitterness and resentment. The thought of you floods their mind with negative emotions. What you need to do instead